Hello. Thank you so much for coming today. I just want to congratulate you on taking the first step in your empowerment through this difficult process of trying to navigate a criminal justice system that you did not ask to be a part of. It may be you yourself that is affected by crime. It could be someone that you know, or you could just be generally curious about how the system works. And if anything were to happen to you, what resources are available. And in all of those instances, you are in the right place. My name is Rachel Robinson. I am an attorney here in Colorado. I was a prosecutor for 4 years until April when I decided to launch my own law practice in victim rights law. I would also like to introduce my legal assistant, Catherine Torres, if you'd like to come off of mute.
Hi. Hello.
Thank you. That is Catherine. She will be here with us today and she will be fielding your questions. If you have any as we go along, just please go ahead and put them in the chat. And at the end, we will have time for those questions. For those of you that are watching the replay, if you have questions, there will be an email that you can send them later. And of course, you are always free to schedule a consultation, a free 30-minute consultation so that I can answer your questions about the system. And of course, if there is additional ways that my law practice can help you, we certainly will. So we'll talk more about that later on. Okay. So thank you so much, Catherine. So today, what we are going to do is just a basic overview of the criminal justice process. That's where we will start. Then I will explain to you what your rights are as a crime victim, or these are rights that you could share with your friends and family if you think someone's been affected by crime. And then I will introduce you to some other resources that my partner organizations offer. And then, of course, I will explain to you my law firm, my practice, and what we do. It is a one of a kind, unique law practice that is geared specifically to victims and what I have seen that they need. But before we jump into that, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. So, as I mentioned before, I was a prosecutor for 4 years in Denver, and I saw the effects that crimes have on people. I heard the complaints that victims had when they were feeling like they were being treated like pawns in a system that's really not built for them. Ironically, because most crimes involve a victim. Nevertheless, they can go unheard, victims go unseen. And as we recently saw down south, I think it's San Luis County, a district attorney was removed from office essentially because of blatant violations of the Victim Rights Act here in Colorado. So this is a law, although they are new laws. Colorado just passed their statutes and their constitutional amendments over the past 30 years, and there aren't a lot of attorneys enforcing the laws. I mean, really none. But nevertheless, they are being taken seriously because that district attorney was removed from office. He actually stepped down amid an internal investigation and an investigation by the attorney general, and he was then disbarred. He's no longer an attorney. This all happened over the past 4 months. And so now it's more important than ever. And now is the time that people are starting to recognize the importance of victim participation in the criminal justice system. And it is just in time for me to jump on the scene and be one of the boots on the ground that is helping to make that happen. Okay, so I will be explaining my practice later on. The other reason that I got into this is because I've been a victim. I am a victim. We've all been traumatized and harmed in our lives. And some of us have gone through crimes. Some of us have just been traumatized by life in general. And so we all have times in our lives that we've been victims in different ways. Of course, here we're talking about crime victims, and so I'll stick to that. I went from being a straight A student, on my way to graduating from high school, going straight into being an attorney. It's something I wanted to do since I was 7 years old. And then all of a sudden hitting a really rough patch in high school and ending up dropping out. And over those years from dropping out before I was able to get to college and get my undergrad, get my master's, and then go to a top law school and become a district attorney in the end, I suffered a lot. I went through anything bad that a woman could go through, I went through over those years after leaving high school with no education to then being able to find my way back to that. And so when I encounter victims, especially as a prosecutor, I always saw myself in them. And I was able to speak to them in a way that they could understand that I see them, that I see my reflection in them, and that I'm going to be the prosecutor who advocates for them in a way that is probably different than what a lot of people get to experience when they're confronting the criminal justice system. And so now that I'm not a prosecutor anymore, I'm able to dedicate my time 100% to advocating for victims, to being that voice that I didn't have when I myself was going through traumatic times in my past. Okay. And one of the things I wish I knew was how the system works. So we're going to start there. We're going to start with how does the criminal justice system work? What is a basic overview of the system? And to help me with that, I have a little presentation for you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me go here. All right. Okay, so the criminal law process. Let's take a look at this together. All right. So typically, for a criminal investigation to open up, it starts with an emergency call. Someone has been harmed, someone has seen someone be harmed, and they call 911. After that call, the police arrive at the scene and they assess the situation. They will determine if there is an imminent threat going on in the moment that they can intervene in. If the threat has passed and there are injuries, they will start to tend to the injuries and make sure that the right people are called, fire department, EMTs, that the hospitals are ready to receive anyone who's been injured. And then they begin to take statements from witnesses to understand what has happened. Through that process, if they're able to determine that there is a suspect who is still on scene, who everyone there says, this is the person who just did this, that person will be put in custody right away. If the person who has done the crime is gone, the police will just continue their investigation, collect all the statements. This is where you get the CSI investigation, where they start collecting blood samples, they wall off the area, they start collecting fingerprints, etc. Now, not all cases are like that, which is something that we'll learn as we go on, but this is where all of that would happen at the crime scene. Okay. And once the police are done with this, we move on to the next step. After the police are done with the crime scene investigation, they will decide if they have enough information to open an investigation and finalize that, meaning that they have a suspect in mind, and they want to go ahead and collect the rest of the evidence to be able to arrest that person. The way that they are allowed to arrest them is if they have probable cause. Probable cause means that through the course of their investigation, the police have developed enough evidence to believe, more likely than not, a crime was committed, and more likely than not, the person that they are seeking to arrest is the one who committed it. Okay. So they will go ahead and obtain the police will obtain an arrest warrant if they have not arrested the person on scene, of course. And the way that they obtain a arrest warrant is they present to a prosecutor the facts of the case, the facts of their investigation as it stands. The prosecutor will then take a look at it and say, okay, well, here's, this does fit the law, and give them the go ahead to share that draft motion for an arrest warrant with a judge who is on call at the time. This can happen 24 hours a day. There's always a prosecutor and a judge on call at different times. They all take turns, but the police would then reach out to the judge, who will then review the arrest warrant, sign it. With technology now, it can be done electronically, thankfully. And then the police are able to go in and set up the operation to arrest the person. Once the person is arrested, they do have the opportunity to speak to the police. Opportunity is a word that I use loosely in this situation because typically this is where you hear the saying, I plead the fifth. This is where the defendant or the suspect at this time has the opportunity to also remain silent. And that is the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment of the US Constitution holds that a person is not required to incriminate themselves, and they do have a right to remain silent. And also at this point in time, they have a right to an attorney. So if the police bring them in and say, hey, we want to talk to you, we believe you did this such and such a crime, would you like to speak with us? That person need only say, I don't want to speak with you, and I want an attorney, and the interrogation then ends. I will note that it's very rarely, I don't think I've ever seen the police bring a person in without having enough evidence to hold them. And so even if they refuse to speak at that time, they can still be arrested because there's probable cause. They will still remain in custody because the police have already established that they have enough evidence to believe this person did it. And so, regardless what they say in that interview, they're likely not going to be released at that point in time. This is important for victims to know because one of the scariest things is, okay, I've told the police, they're going to go talk to that person. What if that person says something that changes the police mind? I've never seen that happen. So, all right. So the next step would be to then file the case. So once the detectives and the police officers have made their arrest under probable cause, they tie their investigation up with a nice neat bow and they hand it off to the prosecutor. The prosecutor is an attorney who works for the government and represents the government, represents the people of that jurisdiction. And we say that because the people pay taxes, the people pay for their government, and the prosecutor thereby works for the people. And this is also important to note as we kind of move through why victim rights is important, is that although the prosecutor is there to hold people accountable for the crimes that they commit, because they work for the people at large, prosecutors are also required to balance the community interest in ensuring that the defendant is able to be, for example, rehabilitated, or the prosecutor has to take into account the defendant's history, their humanity as well, when deciding what is a fair outcome. That is the difference between, for example, a victim rights attorney who can go in and say, no, this is what my clients want. And while we can be aware of the humanity of the defendant and take that into consideration and be empathetic or whatever, there's a rebalancing of the scales that needs to happen, that a victim being heard can tilt more in the favor of justice, if you ask me. When the prosecutor does not consider the wishes of the victim, yeah, they might be thinking of the community at large, but we're ignoring a really important voice. Okay. So, anywho, the prosecutor has, if the person is in custody, has 3 days to make a decision of whether to file the charges or not. Now, at this point, the burden sort of shifts as far, not shifts, but the standard of proof is raised. While the police are looking at this, whether or not more likely than not something happened and this person did it, the prosecutor has to look at it with the evidence that I have right now. Can I prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt? Not beyond no doubt, just a reasonable doubt, which is a much higher level than what the police need to arrest someone. Okay. So the prosecution will go ahead and take a look at the case. If they don't think they can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt based on what the police have provided them, they can send the police back out to get more information. They can create a list of, here are the legal questions we need to answer before I can file this charge. And they can go ahead and send the police back out to get that information. So let's, for purposes of moving forward, say that the prosecutor received the filing from the detectives and the prosecutor is going to go ahead and file the charges. Here's what happens next. The defendant who is now a defendant. Up until this point, he was a suspect. Now the person is a defendant in a legal action. And so this person would show up for an arraignment. That's their first day in court. They are advised of the charges that are brought against them. If they are in custody still, there will be a bond that is argued. This is a financial amount that the person has to pay in order to leave prison or jail, leave custody. And the reason why they put money to it is because it's a way to ensure that the person shows back up for court. Because once they post that money, it doesn't just go to the courts. It is held in a trust. And when the person fails to show up to court, or if they fail to show up, that's when the money is then taken from them. So they have a bond, and that amount is sometimes dictated by the laws, depending on the level of crime. Sometimes there is no bond. If someone is charged with a homicide, depending on the level of homicide, they don't get a bond. There's no financial amount. The courts have decided there's no financial amount that will keep the community safe. And so that person doesn't get a bond. But if they do get a bond, that gets argued at the arraignment. The judge will determine what's a fair amount. And at the same time, particularly since we're talking about victim rights, there's a victim, the mandatory protection order goes into effect. This is immediate, and this is done by the judge, and the victim need not be present. It's not something that you have to ask for. It's automatic under the law. A protection order goes into place. All right. What does the protection order say? Well, according to this statute number, this is Colorado Revised Statute Section 18-1, 1001. It means that the now defendant must vacate or stay away from the home of the alleged victim or witnesses, and to stay away from any other location where they are likely to be found. They are to refrain from contacting directly or indirectly the victim in the case. That means they can't have their family call. They can't have someone drop you a note. They can't have the flower man deliver you flowers. Yes, I've seen that. They can't have anyone reach out to you that has anything to do with them or the case, directly or indirectly. If they do violate that, it's a violation of another criminal law, and they could be charged again for a whole separate offense. Okay. Depending on the type of case, they're not allowed to have firearms. Depending on the type of case, they cannot consume alcohol. And depending on the type of case, they're not allowed to harm any animal that is owned by the victim. And they are not allowed to do anything else that the court deems appropriate, depending on the type of case. So the judge has some leeway there to make sure that their orders encompass the different types of victimization and the nuances in each case that we do see when we're dealing with victim crimes that involve humans and victims. Okay. All right. So once this process is complete, within the district attorney's office, because the district attorney, that's another name for prosecutor here in Denver, the case then gets assigned to a prosecutor, to a deputy district attorney who will handle it from there on out. And the case also gets a victim rights advocate. So we want to look at those abbreviations. We have the Victim Rights Act, so that's the VRA. And then we have a victim rights advocate within every, well, not every, but the district attorney's offices and police have their own victim rights advocates who are to reach out to victims in cases right away and let them know that the case has been assigned, introduce themselves, and as best they can explain to the victim the status of the case and what they foresee happening. This doesn't always go as planned. Case in point, the DA down south, I think it's San Luis County, who was removed. So this does not always happen, but this is what's supposed to happen. So the case gets assigned, a victim rights advocate reach out, and the reason for these policies is because of the Victim Rights Act we have here, that is Colorado Revised Statute 24 4.1302.5. And that says that victims of crime have the right to be treated with fairness, respect, and dignity, and to be free from intimidation, harassment, or abuse throughout the criminal justice process. And this is because under the Colorado Constitution, victims have the right to be informed and present during specific hearings, and to be treated with respect. And so these statutes further uh, specify what that looks like. And what that means to be treated with fairness and to be heard is that they have a right to be informed and present by phone, virtually, etc., at all critical stages of the criminal justice process. And the criminal justice process has many stages, and the critical stages are, for example, the bond hearing that we talked about. A victim must be notified and advised and have a right to be heard on their position on the bond. If there's going to be a guilty plea, the victim needs to be able to provide their victim impact statement and talk about what sentence they think is appropriate. And of course, if there's trial, then of course at that sentencing, they'd have a right to be heard as well. You're always allowed to be at court, however many hearings there are, and speak. The judge has to hear you, the prosecutor has to hear you. And so that is what the law requires. Again, it doesn't always happen, but that is what the law requires. All right, so cases assigned, we have a victim rights advocate who typically is not an attorney. I will add that. And it's typically not even a social worker. It's just sort of a person that's employed by the DA's office who meets their criteria. I'm not sure always the criteria. They're not social workers. They're not always certified in working with victims. And so I think that's where we see a lot of the problems that we find when it comes to their advocacy in the DA's office. Okay. So now we are in the midst of a case, and if the defendant decides to plead guilty, which means take accountability for the crime and admit, yes, I did it, then that will be a hearing by itself, and any victims and witnesses and people are allowed to come and be heard by the judge. The victims are required to come and be heard by the judge. If there is not a guilty plea and the defendant chooses to exercise their right to a trial, then the prosecution typically has 6 months to bring that to trial. It's unlikely to ever happen within the 6 months. That is the statute, that's the timeline that prosecutors have to bring it. But I've never seen a case happen within the first 6 months. There's always the defense continuing, or the prosecutor has to continue, or the court's backed up, or whatever it is. And so typically when we're looking at how long it will take to resolve a case, if the defendant wants to take responsibility very early, which I have seen that happen, where they plead guilty pretty quick and you move on to sentencing. But if they don't, and we're looking at trials, it can be anywhere from a year to 7 years before a case would actually proceed to trial. And that's just a lot of times based on the defendant dragging it out, not having an attorney, switching attorneys, just delaying, etc. So that can happen as well. And there's no way to really sometimes force a defendant to go to trial, because a trial is the defendant's right. I think a lot of people sometimes think that, like, we're going to trial, that's strong. Like, it's not a punishment, it's a right. And it actually creates a lot of burden on victims and witnesses to have to go and testify. You much rather, sometimes, in many cases, depending on the nature of the crime, in particular, sex assault, child abuse, domestic violence, you almost want the person to just take accountability and spare the victims the torment, the burden of having to show up and relive this trauma in front of a jury. So anyway, but this is just an overview. So there'll be other times when I'll be able to go into more sort of the pros and cons of plea bargaining and what it means to have a right to trial. But for now, this is just the basic procedure. Okay. So what are victim rights in all of this? I briefly talked about it earlier. You have a right to be heard, informed, and present at all critical stages. That's the law. In action, in the way that it plays out, if a victim shows up to every single hearing, a victim is allowed to be at every single hearing. The only time you would not be allowed to be there would be if there's another witness who is presenting some type of information. For example, at a hearing where the prosecutor needs to question other witnesses, that's probably the only time a victim couldn't be there, because we want to preserve the victim's testimony and make sure that it doesn't get tainted by hearing what anyone else's perception of what happened, what that is. Other than that, you can be in the courtroom. Courtrooms in general are public. I encourage everyone to, at least once in your life, go to a courtroom and just sit there and see what happens. They're public anyway, but a victim in particular has a right to be there and be heard. Now, of course, a prosecutor and your attorney will obviously tell you, maybe don't talk about the facts of the case, and there are reasons for that. But if you want to go in and express your opinion on the decision that a judge made along the way, you absolutely have a right to do that before the judge makes the decision, and indeed after. Okay? To be treated with fairness, respect, and dignity. Again, this is the demeanor of the prosecutors and the judges. Okay? And this does not always happen. Some prosecutors are just not, they don't always have the best people skills, or they are so lawyerly that they're not capable of meeting people sort of where they're at. I will say that now that we have more diversity among prosecution, especially when it comes to gender, that we do see a better outcomes with attorneys and prosecutors being able to relate to people better, because they're seeing a more humanistic way of approaching what we do, just by bringing women alone into the attorney space. And so that's great. And then of course with the protection order, you're getting treated with respect and dignity and being protected by the criminal justice system, in so much as that order can do, just immediately off the bat. So we recognize that. And now, who is bound by the Victim Rights Act? Okay, so it's the police, the prosecutor, and the judge. If the person is sentenced to probation, it would be probation officers as well, and any judges that handle the case post sentencing throughout the probation period. Okay, so this is all within the criminal system and the actors in the criminal system. So, how do we ensure that victims are having their rights upheld? This is where my law practice comes in. Okay. Um, my law firm is called the Law Office of RWRobinson, LTD, and it is a holistic law practice. This hasn't existed until I created it. And the reason why I did it that way is because of being a victim and seeing victims and getting close to them as a prosecutor. There's more to justice than just getting the right outcome in a criminal case. There's more to justice than just a judge giving whatever sentence a victim thinks is appropriate. There's really sometimes nothing that can heal the damage that has been done. And even if even if you get the exact outcome that you want, if your mind and your heart and your spirit, your soul, your emotions are broken based on what happened, that person still wins. And so, what's really important with my law practice is that I not only advocate for you and help you in the legal side of things, but I also connect you to the resources that can ensure that you are safe, healthy, and sane throughout the process. And so, one of the ways that I do that is I will immediately triage my intake coordinators, my legal assistants. We will immediately triage what are the resources that you need right away to help make sure that you are safe, healthy, and sane enough to get through this difficult time. All right. So we have some of our partner organizations. And I have partnered with the Aurora Community College, both campuses. They have a brilliant resource center for their students who are in need of connecting to other resources while they're trying to figure out what to do next if they are victimized in some way. But any campus that you're on, if you're in college anywhere, go to your resource center. They will help you. We also have the Colorado Organization for Victim Assistance. That is COVA. That is the preeminent network of victim assistance organizations in the state of Colorado. Now, right now, they don't have any solo private attorneys. I'm the only one that is listed on their resource list. But what they do have are all the DA's offices, so the district attorney office contact information, so you know what jurisdiction you're in, you can find that number. All the police departments, they have some shelters, they have different, I think they have a few therapy groups on there that you can reach out to. And in addition to just offering the connectivity to other resources, they also themselves offer, and I'm looking here now because we got a new information on this. They just updated this. They are having rental assistance. Okay, so if you need to have rental assistance on your home while you're trying to get through a hard time, they have that. Emergency hotel assistance and reimbursement for up to 3 days. And they have full or partial assistance with flights, bus tickets, fuel, transportation, anything that has to do with an emergency relocation so that you can get safe while we get you justice. Okay. So that's COVA. And now right at the top of the list, I have the abbreviation RMVLC. That is the Rocky Mountain Victims Law Center. That is the only other organization of attorneys dedicated solely to victim rights. Now, the difference between them and me, of course, is that with them, they are a nonprofit and they can represent you for free if something's gone wrong in your case. So if you are already in the midst of a criminal case and the prosecutor or the judge has violated your rights in some way, or even if you're not sure and you're like, this feels like I'm not being treated with fairness and dignity, this feels like they made a decision that goes against what I wanted in this case, reach out to them immediately and let them triage and decide and figure out what's going on. A lot of what I've seen being in private practice now and even as a prosecutor is sometimes people don't know when your rights are violated. We tend to internalize bad things that happen to us and say, oh, well, maybe it's not that bad, or maybe I did something to deserve this. No, if it doesn't feel good to you, reach out to Rocky Mountain Victims Law Center. If it doesn't feel good to you, whatever has happened, reach out to your resource center. Let the people who have the experience determine what has happened and what can be done. Okay. And that includes me. And so, what my law practice does is that we will offer a lot of services based on the values that I've developed and seen, and based on the voice that I wish I had when I have been a victim, and even now what I've seen that people need. And so those values are dignity, respect, education, empowerment, transparency, and communication. Okay, let me make sure I got all of them. Yes. And the way that I embody those with my law firm and my law practice is that, of course, I will be the point of contact for you between the police and the prosecution. Okay, let me do the heavy lifting while you do the healing. Let me do the heavy lifting and making sure everything is in order, all the documentation, right? So we have prepare and submit the required documents while you focus on going to your doctor's appointments and your physical therapy because something terrible has happened and you need to focus on healing, even physically at times. Okay, I can attend court meetings, court hearings with you, and meetings with police and prosecutors so that they know, that you know, that I know, that they know what your rights are and how to make sure that they are enforced. Okay. Um, I will make sure that we obtain the information necessary for related cases. And so there's a huge gap in between criminal law and, for example, what I've seen, family law. Okay, family courts have a very different goal, a very different understanding of victimization. They actually have no understanding of victimization in the family courts in Colorado. And so it's important to be able to obtain the investigatory documents from the prosecution and from the police so that you can go into family courts if you need to and secure the correct outcomes in those courts. And say you're trying to protect your child from an abusive ex, or protect yourself from an abusive ex, or you're going through a divorce and you're having a really hard time with the family court judge understanding that you're actually a victim because their goals and principles are different. This information is incredibly important, and the law only recently changed to require the prosecutors and the police to provide that information for you while you're going through those other court cases. Okay, so it might be helpful to have an attorney enforce that for you, but just you knowing that now could be sufficient as well. Now you can go to them and say, nope, the victim rights law says I need this information, this is what I need, and you can get it. Okay. My law practice also offers monthly webinars. We do two types. One is just going more in depth in these different areas of law that we just discussed today. And the other webinar is going to be from providers, therapists, different people from my partner organizations who will come in and and offer what they do, right? It's not just telling you about it. They're going to offer what they do. And so we'll have a therapist come in and say, well, this is the type of therapies I do. This is the breathing technique I use. This is what we're doing. And perhaps here's some exercises you can do at home to cope with things. So they're going to teach you and give you those tools as part of the monthly webinars. Okay. Because, like I said, if your mind and your spirit is broken, they win. It doesn't matter what happens in court. Okay. Another thing that we offer, and this is very unique to what I've seen and what I know is needed in the community, is unlimited communication with a guaranteed response time of 24 hours. And in those instances where there's an urgent situation going on, I have put in place urgent protocols so that you can get an even faster response and know what to do. Say the defendant tries to contact you, etc. Something happens and you get a decision in family court, or police contacts you and you don't know what to turn over. There are urgent protocols that you can implement and get a response even faster so that you don't have to try to make those decisions without having someone there to tell you exactly what's the right decision to make, or at least advice on what's the right decision to make and let you know the consequences of each way that you could go. So you're not alone. And then, of course, when it comes to the flat fees and the financing options and payment plans, this is extremely important because I needed this to be accessible. And so I urge you, if you have a question, if you are a victim of a crime, if any of this sounds appealing to you, having that advocate, having that education, reach out. There are ways to get it paid for. I have investors that will subsidize some of my clients, and there's other financing and so many flexible options out there. And if you have a case that I need to take it's alignment and my caseload isn't full, because another thing I'm doing is keeping my caseloads low so that I can offer the top tier service to each one of my clients. But if you believe that this is something that appeals to you, reach out. We will get it paid for somehow. Okay. All right. So thank you so much for your time again. I want to just now bring Catherine, but well, first, Catherine's going to go through the questions that we have today in live. But if you have other questions, of course, please contact intake at rwrobinsonltd.legal. All right, go ahead and email your questions there. If you would like to schedule a consultation, please go to my website. There's some more information on what victim rights is, what I do. It's www.rwrobinsonltd.legal. There you go. And you can get that information there. And then at the end, there is a contact us, and you can submit your form. Put a brief summary of what your question is or what your issue is, and we'll get back to you within 24 hours to get you on the calendar, so where you can come see me for your free consultation. Okay. So thank you again so much. All right, I am going to bring Catherine up here and see if there are any questions. Yeah.
Okay, I think we don't have questions from them. I basically they it's a well presented presentation, so I think they were able to understood the presentation well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Catherine. And if anyone does have questions, please, you see how to get a hold of us, and we can definitely answer those at a later time. And Other than that, congratulations on starting this journey of understanding the criminal justice system. I will be here every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Presenting this. So please share with your friends and family, anyone who has questions. This presentation will be running every Wednesday. Thank you so much.